Today I'm going to read from the David Magarshak translation, because I never read from it. The Wise Serpent. Mrs. Stavrogin rang the bell and flung herself into an armchair by the window. Sit down here, my dear. She motioned Miss Lebyadkin to a chair by a large round table in the middle of the room. Mr. Verkovensky, what do you think this means? Here, have a look at that woman. What does it mean? I, murmured Mr. Verkovensky. But a footman came in. A cup of coffee at once, please, as quickly as possible. Let the carriage wait. My cher, excellent ami, dans quelle inquietude, Mr. Verkovensky cried in an expiring voice. Oh, French, you can see at once that it's high society, Miss Lebyadkin cried, clapping her hands and preparing to listen ecstatically to a conversation in French. Mrs. Stavrogin stared at her almost in terror. We were all silent, waiting to see what the end of it would be. Shatov did not raise his head, and Mr. Verkovensky looked dismayed, as if he were to blame for everything. Beads of perspiration broke out at his temples. I glanced at Liza. She was sitting in a corner almost next to Shatov. Her eyes darted piercingly from Mrs. Stavrogin to the lame woman and back again. Her lips were distended in a smile, but it was not a nice smile. Mrs. Stavrogin saw that smile. In the meantime, Miss Lebyadkin looked completely entranced. She studied Mrs. Stavrogin's beautiful drawing room with delight and without the least sign of confusion. The furniture, the rugs, the pictures on the walls, the painted rococo ceiling, the big bronze crucifix in the corner, the porcelain lamp, the albums, the bric-a-brac on the table. So you're here too, my dear, she cried suddenly, addressing Shatov. Just fancy, I saw you ages ago, but I thought to myself, it can't be him. How could he have come here? And she laughed gaily. You know this woman? Mrs. Stavrogin turned to him at once. Yes, ma'am, Shatov muttered, about to move from his chair, but he remained sitting. What do you know? Please tell me quickly. Why, he faltered, grinning without any reason. You can see for yourself. What can I see? Come on, say something. Well, she lives in the same house as I, with her brother, an army officer. Well? Shatov again hesitated. Oh, it's hardly worth talking about, he grunted and fell silent determinately. He even went red in the face with determination. To be sure, I could hardly have expected anything more from you, Mrs. Stavrogin cut him short indignantly. She saw clearly now that everybody in the room knew something, and yet they were all afraid of something and evaded her questions, anxious to conceal something from her. The footman entered carrying a small silver tray and handed her the cup of coffee she had specially ordered, but at a sign from her went immediately over to Miss Lebyadkin with it. Drink it, dear, and get warm. You must have got frozen outside the church. Merci, said Miss Lebyadkin, taking the cup and suddenly bursting out laughing at having said merci to the footman. But catching Mrs. Stavrogin's stern look, she flushed and put the cup on the table. You're not angry, Auntie, she murmured with a kind of flippant playfulness. What? Mrs. Stavrogin sat up in her chair with a start. I am no aunt of yours, am I? What did you mean by that? Miss Lebyadkin, not expecting such an outburst of anger, trembled all over convulsively and fell back in her chair. I thought that's how I should address you, she murmured, staring wide-eyed at Mrs. Stavrogin. Lisa called you that. Which Lisa are you talking about? That young lady there, Miss Lebyadkin pointed to Liza. I want to mention in Magarshak he calls her Lisa, and of course we know her as Liza or Elizaveta. That young lady there, Miss Lebyadkin pointed to Lisa with a finger. Since when has she become Lisa to you? Why, you called her that yourself 10 minutes ago, Miss Lebyadkin said, recovering her spirits a little. And I saw a beautiful girl like her in my dream. She smiled as though unintentionally. Mrs. Stavrogin reflected and calmed down a little. She even smiled faintly at Miss Lebyadkin's last words. The young woman, having caught sight of her smile, got up and limping walked shyly up to her. Please take it back, she said suddenly, taking off the black shawl Mrs. Stavrogin had put round her shoulders earlier. I forgot to return it to you. Don't be angry with me for being so rude. Put it on at once and keep it. Go and sit down and have your coffee, and please don't be afraid of me, my dear. Calm yourself. I'm beginning to understand you. Cher ami, Mr. Verkovensky ventured again. Heavens, Mr. Verkovensky, I scarcely know where I am without you. You might at least spare me. Please ring the bell beside you. The maid's room. No one spoke. Her eyes darted suspiciously and irritably over all our faces. Agasha, her favorite parlor maid, came in. "Bring me the check shawl I bought in Geneva, please. What's Miss Shatov doing?" "She isn't very well, ma'am." "Will you go and ask her to come here, please? Tell her that I'd be greatly obliged if she came here, even if she does not feel well." At that moment there was again an unusual noise of footsteps and voices in the adjoining rooms, and suddenly the panting and distraught Praskovya Drozdov, leaning on the arm of Maurice Drozdov, appeared in the doorway. "Oh dear, I could scarcely drag myself here. Lisa, you mad thing, what are you doing to your mother?" she screamed, putting, as all weak and irritable women often do, all her accumulated irritation into that scream. "My dear Mrs. Stavrogin, I've come to you for my daughter." Mrs. Stavrogin glanced at her frowningly, half rose to meet her, and making little attempt to conceal her vexation, said, "Good afternoon, Praskovya. Do me a favor and take a seat. I had an idea you would come." Mrs. Drozdov could not possibly have been surprised by such a reception. Mrs. Stavrogin had always, indeed from the time they were children, treated her former school friend despotically and, under the guise of friendship, almost with contempt. But this was quite an exceptional occasion. During the last few days, the two households had almost reached the point of a complete rupture. A fact I've already mentioned briefly. The reasons for the incipient rupture were still a mystery to Mrs. Stavrogin, and that made them all the more offensive. But what especially aroused Mrs. Stavrogin's anger was that Mrs. Drozdov had begun treating her of late with quite extraordinary disdain. Mrs. Stavrogin, of course, felt deeply hurt, and in the meantime certain rumors had begun to reach her which also irritated her exceedingly, particularly because of their vagueness. Mrs. Stavrogin was of a most straightforward and frankly proud disposition, with, if I may put it that way, Mrs. Stavrogin was of a most straightforward and frankly proud disposition, with, if I may put it that way, a propensity for taking things by direct assault, and she always showed a preference for open warfare. However that may be, the fact remains that the two ladies had not met for the last 5 days. The last visit had been made by Mrs. Stavrogin, who had left the Drozdov creature feeling offended and perplexed. I think I am justified in stating that Mrs. Drozdov had come with the naive conviction that Mrs. Stavrogin had some reason to be afraid of her. That could be plainly discerned from the way she looked, but it would seem that Mrs. Stavrogin was possessed by the demon of the most arrogant pride every time there was the least suspicion that she was for some reason supposed to have been humiliated. Like many women of weak character who allow themselves to be insulted for a long time without protest, Mrs. Drozdov, for her part, showed quite an extraordinary enthusiasm for launching an attack at the first favorable opportunity. It is true she was ill just then, but it was during her bouts of illness that she always was more irritable than usual. I may add finally that if a quarrel had broken out between the two old childhood friends, none of us in the drawing room would have embarrassed them in any way, for we were looked upon as old friends and almost as underlings. I realized this not without a certain feeling of alarm at the time. Mr. Verkovensky, who had not sat down since the arrival of Mrs. Stavrogin, sank exhausted into a chair the moment he heard Mrs. Drozdov scream, and tried desperately to catch my eye. Shatov turned sharply in his chair and even grunted something under his breath. I had the impression that he wanted to get up and go away. Lisa was on the point of getting up, but she resumed her seat immediately without paying the slightest attention to her mother's scream, not because of her contrariness, but because she was apparently entirely obsessed by some other powerful emotion. Her eyes were fixed almost abstractedly on some invisible point in the air, and she even stopped taking any notice of Miss Lebyadkin. "Oh dear, here, is it?" Mrs. Drozdov exclaimed, pointing to the armchair near the table and sinking down in it heavily with the help of Mr. Drozdov. "I wouldn't have sat down in your house, my dear, if it weren't for my poor leg," she added in a strained voice. Mrs. Stavrogin raised her head slightly and pressed the fingers of her right hand gingerly to her right temple, evidently feeling an acute twinge of pain there. Tic douloureux. "Good gracious, Praskovya, why shouldn't you sit down in my house? Your husband has treated me as a good friend all his life, and you and I used to play at school together as little girls." Mrs. Drozdov waved her hands in annoyance. "I knew it. You always start talking about our school when you want to be nasty to me. It's a well-known trick of yours. But if you ask me, it's only fine talk. I can't stand that boarding school of yours. I can see that you're in a particularly bad temper today. How are your legs? Here, they're bringing you some coffee. Have it, please, and don't be cross. There's a dear. You always talk to me as if I were a little girl. I don't want your coffee, so there." And she waved her hand querulously at the servant who was offering her the coffee. The others, too, by the way, refused coffee, except Mr. Drozdov and myself. Mr. Verkovensky accepted it, but put it down on the table. Though Miss Lebyadkin wanted another cup badly, and indeed had already put out her hand for it, she changed her mind and declined it decorously, quite obviously pleased with herself for doing so. Mrs. Stavrogin smiled wryly. Mrs. Stavrogin smiled wryly. "I expect you're again imagining something, my dear Praskovia, and that's why you've come here. All your life you've only lived by imagining things. You got cross with me just now because I mentioned our boarding school. But do you remember how you came one day and told the whole class that the hussar officer Shablikin had proposed to you, and how Madame Lefebvre proved that you were telling a lie? But you did not tell a lie. Oh no, you just imagined it all to amuse yourself. Well, come, tell me what's wrong now. What are you imagining now? What are you so dissatisfied with now? And you fell in love with the priest at our school, our scripture master. There's something for you to remember since you're so spiteful. Ha ha ha." She laughed maliciously and then went off into a fit of coughing. "Oh, so you haven't forgotten the priest, have you?" Mrs. Stavrogin gave her a baleful look. Her face turned green. Mrs. Drozdov suddenly sat up with a dignified air. "I'm afraid, my dear, I'm not in a laughing mood now. Why did you involve my daughter in your family scandal before the whole town? That's what I've come here to find out." "In my family scandal?" Mrs. Stavrogin asked, drawing herself up menacingly. "Mother, I too would like to ask you very much to moderate your language," Lisa said suddenly. "What did you say?" Her mother was about to start screaming again, but controlled herself suddenly as she caught sight of her daughter's flashing eyes. "How could you talk about a family scandal, Mother?" Lisa cried, flushing. "I came here of my own free will, with Mrs. von Limp's permission, because I wanted to find out this poor woman's story and be of some use to her." "The poor woman's story," Mrs. Drozdov repeated slowly with a spiteful laugh. "Is it your business to get yourself mixed up in such stories? We've had enough of your bullying, my dear." She turned furiously to Mrs. Stavrogin. "I don't know whether it's true or not, but I've heard it said that you've got everybody in the town dancing to your tune. Well, it seems your turn has come too." Mrs. Stavrogin sat straight as an arrow on the point of being shot from the bow. For 10 seconds she looked sternly and fixedly at Mrs. Drozdov. "Well, Praskovia," she said at last with ominous calm, "thank God that there are no strangers here. You've said a lot you'll be sorry for. I'm not frightened of public opinion as some people I'm not so frightened of public opinion as some people I could mention are, my dear. It's you who, because of your pride, are terrified of public opinion. As for there being no strangers here, I dare say that's certainly something you ought to be pleased about." "You've grown wiser this last week, have you?" "It's not I who've grown wiser this week. It's just that the truth has this week come out at last." "Which truth has come out this week? Listen, Praskovia. Don't you try to exasperate me. Explain yourself this very minute. I ask you frankly, what truth has come out and what exactly do you mean by that?" "Why, the whole truth is sitting there." Mrs. Drozdov suddenly pointed a finger at Miss Lebyadkin with that desperate determination which no longer cares for any consequences so long as it can crush an opponent. Miss Lebyadkin, who had watched her all the time with gay curiosity, burst out laughing joyfully at the sight of the angry visitor's finger pointing at her and shifted excitedly in her chair. "Oh, cool." Miss Lebyadkin, who had watched her all the time with gay curiosity, burst out laughing joyfully at the sight of the angry visitor's finger pointing at her and shifted excitedly in her chair. "Dear Lord, have they all gone off their heads?" Mrs. Stavrogin cried, and turning pale, she threw herself against the back of her chair. She turned so pale that it even caused a commotion in the room. Mr. Verkovensky was the first to rush up to her. I, too, drew near. Even Lisa got up, though she remained standing by her chair. But the most frightened person of all was Mrs. Drozdov herself. She uttered a cry, raised herself in her chair as much as she could, and almost wailed in a mournful voice, "My dear, please forgive me for my wicked foolishness. Water, give her some water, somebody." "Don't whimper, I beg you, Praskovian. Go back to your places, gentlemen, please. I don't want any water," Mrs. Stavrogin said firmly, though not in a loud voice, with pale lips. "Oh, my dear," Mrs. Drozdov went on, having composed herself a little. "My dear friend, I may be guilty of having said something I shouldn't, but it's those anonymous letters some horrible people have been bombarding me with that have exasperated me beyond all endurance. I wish they'd send them to you, since it's you they are writing about. After all, my dear, I have a daughter." Mrs. Stavrogin gazed at her in silence with wide-open eyes, listening with astonishment. At that moment, a side door in the corner was opened noiselessly, and Dasha Shatov walked into the room. She stopped and looked around. She was struck by our dismay. Quite possibly she did not at once notice Miss Lebyatkin, of whose presence no one had warned her. Mr. Verkovensky caught sight of her first. He made a quick movement, went red in the face, and for some unknown reason announced in a loud voice, "Miss Shatov!" so that all eyes at once turned on her. "So that's Dasha," Miss Lebyatkin cried. "Well, Shatov, darling, your sister's not at all like you. How dare my brother call such a beautiful girl the serf girl Dashka?" Meanwhile, Dasha had gone up to Mrs. Stavrogin, but struck by Miss Lebyatkin's exclamation, she turned around quickly and stopped dead before her chair, staring fixedly at the half-witted woman. "Sit down, Dasha," Mrs. Stavrogin said with terrifying composure. "Nearer, that's right. You can see this woman from your seat. Do you know her?" Love how she always tells people how to sit, where to sit, you know. "You can see this woman from your seat. Do you know her?" "I've never seen her," Dasha replied quietly, and after a short pause added, "I suppose it's the sick sister of a Mr. Lebyatkin?" "And I too, my dear, see you for the first time now, though I've long ago wanted to meet you, because in every gesture of yours I can see an educated lady," Miss Lebyatkin cried with enthusiasm. "As for that flunky of mine calling you names, is it really possible that a charming and educated young lady like yourself should have taken his money? For you are a dear, a dear, a dear. You can take it from me," she concluded rapturously, waving her hand in front of her own face. "Do you understand anything?" Mrs. Stavrogin asked with proud dignity. "I understand everything, ma'am." "You've heard about the money?" "I suppose it must be the money which in Switzerland I undertook to hand over to Mr. Lebyatkin, her brother, at the request of Mr. Stavrogin." For a moment there was silence. "Did Nicholas himself ask you to hand it over?" "He was very anxious to send that money, 300 rubles in all, to Mr. Lebyatkin. He did not know his address, but only knew that he would be in our town. He asked me to give it to Mr. Lebyatkin if he arrived." "But what money was lost? What was that woman talking about just now?" "That I don't know, ma'am. I too have heard that Mr. Lebyatkin is saying about me in the hearing of people that I didn't give him all the money. But I don't know what he means. I was given 300 rubles and I sent him 300 rubles. Miss Shatov had almost regained her composure completely. And let me add here that it was difficult to astonish this girl and disconcert her for long, whatever her real feelings might be. She now gave all her answers without hurrying, replying to each question with precision, quietly, smoothly, without a trace of her first sudden agitation, and without the least embarrassment, which might have implied a consciousness of any sort of guilt. Mrs. Stavrogin kept her eyes fixed on her all the time she was speaking. For a minute, Mrs. Stavrogin thought it over. "If," she said at last firmly and obviously addressing herself to the spectators in the room, though she looked only at Dasha, "if Nicholas addressed his request not to me but asked you, he must have had his own reasons for doing so. I have no right to pry into them if he thought it necessary to keep it a secret from me, but the very fact that you took part in this business is sufficient to put my mind at rest about those reasons of his. I want you to know that Dasha, you above all, but you see, my dear, you who are ignorant of the ways of the world, could commit an indiscretion with a clear conscience, and you did so when you undertook to have dealings with some rascal. The rumors spread by this rascal merely prove your mistake, but I shall find out about him. And since it is my duty to protect your interests, I shall know how to take your part. Now we have to put an end to all this. The best thing to do when he comes to see you," Miss Lebyatkin suddenly interposed, leaning forward in her chair, "is to send him to the servants' quarters. Let him play cards on a chest with the servants, while we sit here and have coffee. I dare say you might send him a cup of coffee, but I have nothing but contempt for him." And she tossed her head expressively. "We must put an end to this," Mrs. Stavrogin repeated after having listened attentively to Miss Lebyatkin. Please ring the bell, Mr. Verkovensky. Mr. Verkovensky rang and suddenly stepped forward in great agitation. If I, he murmured excitedly, getting red in the face, faltering and stammering, if I, too, have heard a most disgusting story, or rather slander, then it was with the utmost indignation. Enfoncé au homme perdu, et quelque chose comme un forçat évadé. He broke off and did not finish. Mrs. Stavrogin screwed up her eyes and examined him from top to toe. The deferential butler came in.